Hi all, I'm Lekha Poli, Assistant Professor of Naibhunya College, Pongam. The topic I have chosen for today is literary criticism and literary theory and different types of approaches in literary criticism. Literary criticism is actually looking at literature from different angles. It is study and evaluation and interpretation of an artistic work. And it focuses on the qualities, characters of an artistic piece. In a way, we can consider it as a journey deep into the core of the literature. And when we hear the word criticism, the very first thing which comes to our mind is something of negativeness. Criticism is actually a positive approach which takes us deep into the core of literature. And when we talk about literary theory, it is an examination of a literary text through a specific lens. So each theory is a lens. Different theories are different lenses. For example, we can take feminist theory. It is actually a lens which focuses on the representations of gender in text. There are different types of critical approaches to the study of literature. Critical approaches are different perspectives we consider when looking at a piece of literature. And they seek to give us answers to these questions in addition to aiding us in interpreting literature. And the first question is, what do we read? And why do we read? And how do we read? And I mentioned to you there are different types of critical approaches, but here we are focusing on 7 critical approaches. The first one is reader response criticism, then comes formalist criticism, there is psychological criticism, sociological criticism, feminist or gender criticism, there is Marxist criticism, biographical criticism, and new historicist criticism. So before we move on to different types of critical approaches, we have got some questions to ponder for each theory. The first one is, what are the benefits of each form of criticism? What are potential problems with each form? Is there a right or wrong form? Can the mode of criticism alter the entire meaning of a text? And moving on to the first critical approach I mentioned to you. The first approach is reader response criticism or reader response critical approach. And it asserts that a great deal of meaning in a text, it lies with how the reader responds to it. It focuses on the act of reading and how it affects our perception of meaning in a text, how we feel at the beginning of the text reading and how we feel at the end of a reading. And it deals more with the process of creating meaning and experiencing a text as we read. So a text is actually an experience. It's not an object. A text is not an object. It is an experience for the readers. A text is a living thing that lives in the imagination of the readers. So as a whole, we can say that reader plus reading situation plus text is the actual meaning of the textbook. So I put forward some important ideas in reader response critical approach. An individual reader's interpretation, it usually changes over time. Readers from different generations and different time periods, they interpret text differently. And moving on to the second critical approach, that is formalist criticism or formalist critical approach, it emphasizes the form of a literary work to determine its meaning, focusing on literary elements and how they work to create meaning. And we can see it examines a text as independent from its time period, social setting, and author's background. So here in this particular approach, a text is an independent entity. It focuses on close readings of text and analysis of effects of literary elements and techniques on the text. And the third critical approach is psychological criticism or psychological critical approach. It views text as a revelation of its author's mind and personality. It is based on the work of Sigmund Freud, and it also focuses on the hidden motivations of literary characters. It looks at literary characters as a reflection of the writer. And the next approach, critical approach, is sociological approach. Sociological criticism, it argues that social context, that is the social environment, it must be considered when analyzing a textbook. It focuses on the values of a society, how those views are reflected in a text. And we can see it emphasizes the economic, political and cultural issues within literary text. And here, the core belief of this particular approach is that literature is a reflection of its society. And moving on to the fifth approach, that is Marxist approach or Marxist critical approach. And here it emphasizes economic and social conditions. It is based on the political theory of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and it is concerned with understanding the role of power, politics and money in literary text. And it examines literature to see how it reflects the way in which dominant groups, typically the majority, they exploit the subordinate groups, and the way in which people become alienated from one another through power, money and politics. The fourth critical approach is the feminist approach, and it is concerned with the role, position and influence of women in a literary text. And it asserts that most literature throughout time, it has been written by men for men. It examines the way that the female consciousness is depicted by both male and female writers. And feminist critical approach, it has got four basic principles. First one is Western civilization is patriarchal. Second one, the concepts of gender are mainly cultural ideas created by patriarchal societies. And the third one, patriarchal ideals, they pervade literature. Fourth one, most literature through time has been gender biased. Next critical approach is the biographical approach, that is the fifth one. It argues that we must take an author's life and background into consideration, into account when we study a particular textbook. And there are three benefits of the biographical approach. The first one, the facts about an author's experience, it can help a reader decide how to interpret that particular textbook. Second one is, a reader can better appreciate a text by knowing a writer's struggles or difficulties in creating a textbook. And the third one, a reader can understand a writer's preoccupation by studying the way they apply and modify their own life experiences in their works. And the sixth critical approach is the new historicist approach, and it argues that every literary work is a product of its time and its world. And it provides information necessary to understand how literary texts were perceived in their time. It shows how literary texts reflect ideas and attitudes of the time in which they were written. And new historicist critics, they often compare the language in contemporary documents and literary texts to reveal cultural assumptions and values in text. Before I conclude, you have to remember one point, that we should always keep our focus on the text and use these critical approaches to clarify your understanding of a text and develop an interpretation of it. That's all about literary criticism, literary theory, and different critical approaches to literature. So hope you have all understood the points I have mentioned here. Okay guys, take care. Bye.